She thought she was inheriting a quiet life, a run-down barn, some overgrown fields, and a few faded memories of summers past. But when Claire Jensen returned to her late grandfather's farm, she found more than old tractors and dusty tools. Beneath the soil, hidden under layers of time and silence, was a sealed underground hangar marked U.S. Air Force property. And what waited inside wasn't just military hardware. It was a secret her grandfather kept, one that could rewrite everything she thought she knew about him and herself. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing stories come alive around the world. And if you believe some legacies are buried just deep enough to be worth the dig, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story, it might just top this one. Claire Jensen hadn't set foot on the farm in nearly 12 years. Not since the summer before high school, back when her grandfather still had strength in his hands and a glint in his eye that could split a stone. Now the man was gone. Heart failure, the lawyer had said, and with him, the only real connection Claire ever had to this place. She'd inherited everything. The house, the barn, the fields. And as she pulled up the long gravel drive in a borrowed truck with more rust than paint, she felt like she was stepping into someone else's memory. The farmhouse leaned a little more than she remembered. The porch sagged. The weather vane on the barn spun aimlessly in a breeze that smelled like dry hay and something faintly metallic. Her boots crunched against the gravel as she got out and stood still for a moment, letting the wind push against her collar. The sky stretched wide above, too quiet, too open. She was used to the city now. Noise, clutter, motion. This was like walking into a painting that hadn't been touched in years. The inside of the house was worse. Dust lay thick on every surface. The kitchen still had the same blue curtains, now sun-bleached and hanging like tired flags. The table where he used to carve apples with his pocket knife sat untouched, 2 chairs pushed back as if he'd just stepped away for a minute. Claire didn't sit. She didn't touch anything. She just opened the envelope the lawyer had given her, the last will and testament of Harold Jensen, and started reading. There wasn't much legal language. Her grandfather had never been one for fluff. The letter was short, written in his careful, blocky print. Claire, if you're reading this, I guess I finally kicked the bucket. Everything's yours now, kid. The land, the house, even that busted tractor I never got around to fixing. But there's one thing I never told anyone. Not even your mom. Check behind the old windmill. Dig down 3 feet. Be careful, Grandpa. Claire read it twice, then a third time. She looked out the window toward the fields, the faded metal blades of the windmill slicing lazy circles against the sky. It wasn't like him to joke. And even if it was, something in the note didn't feel like a punchline. By the time she reached the windmill, dusk had begun to settle. The wind picked up again, cooler now, curling dust around her boots. She dropped to her knees and started digging with her hands. The earth was dry, packed, but not impossible. It didn't take long, less than 10 minutes, before her fingers scraped against something hard. Not rock, not pipe, metal. She cleared more dirt, revealing the corner of a heavy steel hatch. There was no lock, but it was bolted shut. Stenciled in flaking white paint across the top were 4 words that made her stomach twist. U.S. Air Force property. Claire sat back on her heels, wind rushing past her ears. This wasn't just a farm anymore. This was something else entirely, and her grandfather had wanted her to find it. Claire barely slept that night. The hatch haunted her dreams, not with fear, but with a buzzing sense of unfinished business. She kept replaying the moment she'd brushed the dirt away and saw the faded white letters. U.S. Air Force property. 4 words that didn't belong in a cornfield in rural Kansas. 4 words that didn't make sense, unless the man who raised her wasn't just a quiet farmer with strong hands and a weak heart. At dawn, she was already out there again, coffee in one hand, crowbar in the other. She hadn't found any bolt cutters in the barn, but she had found her grandfather's old tool chest, still sitting behind the tractor he never fixed. The crowbar was bent at the tip, the handle worn smooth. familiar, like it had been waiting for her. The bolts on the hatch were rusted but not fused. That was the first thing that set her nerves tingling. If this thing had been buried for decades, it should have taken a blowtorch to budge it. But they came loose with some grunting and a few muttered curses. She wiped sweat from her brow, slid the final bolt free, and stood up. The hatch didn't open on its own. No dramatic hiss, no creaking groan, just silence. Then, with one firm tug, the metal door shifted. Beneath it wasn't dirt. It was a staircase. Steel, ribbed, leading down into darkness so thick it seemed to eat the daylight. A rush of cold air blew upward from the tunnel, carrying a smell that was hard to place like old oil and sealed time. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back. Not because she was scared, not exactly, but because the moment felt too big to rush into. She hadn't even changed out of yesterday's jeans, and now she was standing on the edge of what felt like a secret buried by the government or her own family. Maybe both. She grabbed a flashlight from the barn and returned, her fingers trembling more from adrenaline than fear. She clicked it on and swept the beam down the stairs. It didn't reach the bottom. The light swallowed in black. Claire took one deep breath, then another, and then she started down. The metal stairs echoed under her boots. Each step clanged with hollow certainty. She counted them 27, then 40, then 62. At the 69th step, the stairs leveled into a wide steel platform. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Before her stretched a massive chamber, a curved tunnel, ribbed with support beams, the walls still gleaming faintly with condensation. It wasn't abandoned. It wasn't decaying. This place was preserved. She moved forward slowly, the echo of her footsteps bouncing like ghosts along the walls. A faded mural sat above the far archway, the Air Force crest. Below it, a single word in block letters, Trident. Claire had no idea what it meant, but as she moved deeper into the belly of the earth, one thing became painfully clear. Her grandfather hadn't just lived a second life. He'd buried it and left the key for her to find. The silence in the hangar was complete, not peaceful, not like the hush of an empty house or a quiet field. This was the kind of silence that pressed in around you, heavy, almost wet, like the air had been holding its breath for decades. Claire's flashlight beam skimmed across cold metal and ribbed walls, revealing layers of dust in some places and none in others. Something about that was wrong. Too clean, too preserved, like someone had been here after her grandfather, or never left. She ran her hand along the tunnel's wall, smooth, seamless. The engineering didn't look like anything she'd seen before, and she wasn't an expert by any stretch. But she'd dated a civil engineer for 2 years, and she knew what standard concrete or structural steel was supposed to feel like. This wasn't that. It had a kind of industrial sleekness, purposeful. The tunnel led her deeper into the complex, branching off to the left and right, but always sloping gently downward. Every few yards, an old military-style light fixture jutted from the ceiling, each one still intact, but dark. She passed sealed doors marked with cryptic labels. PWR AUX, INT, Hatch 2, Delta Arm Lock. None of it meant anything to her, but all of it felt deliberate. Eventually, she found a main corridor with a control panel mounted beside a massive blast door. The panel was dark, but still intact, sealed behind a cracked plexiglass cover. It looked ancient and futuristic at the same time, like something from a Cold War film and a sci-fi movie had collided and compromised. She brushed her gloved hand across it and froze. Fingerprints, clear ones, fresh. Someone had been here recently. Her mind reeled. Was it her grandfather? Had he come down here in his final days, knowing the end was near? Or had someone else returned someone who still had a reason to keep the place quiet? Claire took a shaky breath and backed away from the panel. The air felt colder suddenly, as if the pressure had dropped. The kind of chill you don't feel on your skin, only in your spine. She wasn't sure whether it was fear or awe. Maybe both. She turned and headed back toward a side passage she'd passed earlier, a smaller door with no markings. It wasn't locked, just a latch and a heavy handle. It opened with a reluctant hiss. Inside was a utility room, maybe 12 feet square. Rusted lockers lined the far wall. A tool chest sat in one corner, and above it, a dusty workbench cluttered with wiring, a soldering iron, and rows of hand-labeled switches. But it was what hung above the bench that made her stop breathing. A framed photo, black and white, faded, but unmistakable. Her grandfather in a flight suit, standing in front of a vehicle she'd never seen before. It wasn't a plane. Not exactly. It looked like part stealth jet, part space shuttle, its nose sharp, its wings short, stubby, almost like fins. The name stenciled on the side was partially obscured, but she could read enough. Trident 7. And beside it, standing just as proud, was a second figure, a woman, young, and wearing the same pendant Claire had around her neck, the one her grandfather gave her when she was 10. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just military. This was family. Claire stumbled backward from the photo, her heart hammering in her chest. That pendant, it was too specific to be a coincidence. A silver compass rose with a cracked green stone in the center. Her grandfather had told her it was a good luck charm from his flying days, something he'd never taken off until he gave it to her. She'd worn it every day since she was 10, and yet there it was, around the neck of a woman in a photo she'd never seen before, inside a hidden military facility buried beneath her family's land. She moved back toward the bench, eyes scanning the image again. The second figure wasn't quite clear, partially out of frame, blurred by time and light exposure. But the posture, the hair, the height, they were all just close enough to make Claire feel like she was staring into a mirror of the past. She reached for the toolbox beneath the bench, needing something to ground her, something solid. As she tugged at the middle drawer, it jammed halfway. She yanked harder. It gave with a screech, and that's when she noticed the loose panel behind it. Just a sliver of separation in the wall, like a cover plate, not screwed all the way down. Curiosity overrode hesitation. She slid her fingers into the gap and pulled gently. The panel popped loose, revealing a shallow recess behind the wall. Inside, wrapped in a canvas cloth and bound with a cracked leather strap, was a small water-damaged journal. Her grandfather's name was etched faintly on the front, not printed, burned in with a soldier's precision. She didn't open it right away. Just held it in her lap, cross-legged on the cold floor of the maintenance room. The canvas smelled like machine oil and cedar. She unwrapped it slowly, then turned the first page. His handwriting. Clear. Careful. They told us this wouldn't exist. Told us it was off, books off-world. Told us the people we'd work with wouldn't have real names. But I had one. And she did too. Claire turned the page. Diagrams. Sketches of turbine engines, cockpit layouts, propulsion chambers. She wasn't fluent in aeronautics, but even she could tell these weren't designs for anything commercially known. Some pages were in pencil, others smudged with oil. The farther she read, the more the entries shifted from technical to personal. Trident isn't just a project, it's a promise. And when the time comes, Claire will understand why we built it. Her breath caught. He named her. In writing. In the middle of notes about black site operations and prototype aircraft buried underground. This wasn't some generic goodbye or poetic ramble. He meant her. She flipped ahead. They told me to bury it when she was born, that it would never be needed again, that the threat was over. But I never trusted peace bought in silence, not after what I saw, so I left it intact. Left everything intact. One day, she'll come back. She'll find the hangar, and then she'll know. Claire closed the journal gently and pressed her forehead against the cold metal wall. The chill didn't matter, because nothing felt real anymore, and yet everything suddenly did. Claire didn't know how long she sat there. The journal lay open on her lap, her fingertips resting on the last sentence like it might change if she let go. The underground air felt heavier now, charged with the weight of things long buried secrets, yes, but also choices. Her grandfather had built a vault beneath his farm, stocked it, protected it, left breadcrumbs for her alone to find. And now that she was inside, there was no denying the truth. This place had never been meant to stay forgotten. She tucked the journal into her backpack and stepped out of the maintenance room, her flashlight casting long, swinging shadows across the curved walls. Back in the main corridor, she turned toward the blast door with the darkened panel. She paused, then reached into her pocket and pulled out the pendant. The cracked green stone caught the light and glinted almost like an answer. On a hunch, she pressed it to the center of the console. Nothing happened. She laughed once sharp, humorless. "Not everything is a movie," she muttered. But as she turned to leave, a low click echoed from behind the plexiglass. Then, a low hum. Lights flickered to life along the ceiling in a domino chain, stretching into the tunnel ahead. Claire spun around just as the console blinked to green. Identification accepted. A hiss of hydraulics. The blast door shuddered, then began to roll aside. The room beyond it was massive, easily the size of a football field, but shaped more like a submarine hangar, curved and ribbed, walls humming with latent power. Steel catwalks crisscrossed above, leading to sealed bays marked in stenciled black. Engine room A, cargo lock, pressure chamber. But Claire's eyes locked on the center of the chamber. There, under floodlights that had just blinked to life, sat the aircraft from the photo. Sleek, black, still gleaming beneath a fine layer of dust as if it had been waiting. It wasn't just a plane. It wasn't just a prototype. The angles were wrong for a jet. The wings didn't make sense for traditional lift. No rotors, no turbines she could see. And yet every inch of it radiated purpose. Not alien, not futuristic, just ahead of its time, ahead of the world. She approached it slowly, boots ringing out against the polished concrete. A small placard stood to one side of the nose. Trident 7. Project. Deep coil. Authorized eyes only. Another line below that. Clearance. H. Jensen divided by C. Redmond divided by DOD 5097B. Her grandfather's name. And a second C. Redmond, the woman from the photo. Claire's head spun. She moved closer to the cockpit. The glass canopy was sealed, but intact. Inside, the controls looked minimalist, far too few switches, and none of them labeled in a way she recognized. Just one lever, one display, and a slot just beneath it. Claire crouched. The slot was a key insert, not a modern ignition, a real, old-school keyhole. Something tactile, mechanical, something that could still be turned. And in her pocket, heavy with meaning, her grandfather's pendant suddenly felt like more than luck. It felt like design. Claire didn't realize she was holding her breath until her lungs burned. She backed away from the cockpit, the pendant clenched in her fist. It didn't make sense, but then again, none of this did. A Cold War aircraft hidden in her grandfather's farm. A top-secret hangar built into Kansas soil. And now this. A prototype with a keyhole that might match the necklace she'd worn since childhood. She circled the aircraft slowly. Its body was matte black, broken only by small etched markings along the underside panel numbers, hydraulic ports, engineering codes. No national insignias, no paint. Just utility. It was unlike any aircraft she'd ever seen, and Claire had grown up on stories. Her grandfather had once shown her a book filled with old planes from wars past, rattling off names like they were sacred: B-50, 2, P-50, 1, F-4 Phantom. But this wasn't in any book. On the side of the fuselage, something new stopped her in her tracks. Claire Sparrow Jensen. Test Flight Line 3. She stared at it, her mind refusing to catch up. Her name, stenciled like a crew chief or pilot. Not etched recently, but faded, aged. Part of the aircraft's original finish. Her hands trembled. She touched the letters. The paint flaked under her thumb, dry with time. This wasn't something her grandfather had added in some sentimental gesture. This had been here for years. Decades, maybe. But how? She hadn't been born when this thing was supposedly built. Claire turned and sat down hard on a nearby crate, letting the silence wrap around her like a weighted blanket. The hum of the facility had returned to stillness. The lights stayed on, but dimmed slightly, almost as if the place knew she needed time. She pulled the journal back out of her backpack and flipped toward the end. Several pages had been stuck together, warped with moisture. Carefully, she peeled them apart. There, in faded ink. They told me she wouldn't remember. Said it would be better that way. That if we ran the final test, memory collapse was the best outcome we could hope for. But I couldn't accept that. Couldn't let her grow up thinking she came from nothing when she came from this. From purpose. From something bigger. Claire blinked, her heart racing. They made me walk away. Made me raise her like it had never happened. But I left it all here, locked beneath our feet, waiting. Because one day, she'd come back. Not to fly it, no. But to finish what we started. To remember. And to choose what comes next. A chill crept down her spine. She flipped to the very last page. One line. Claire. The key isn't the pendant. It's you. The silence was interrupted by the softest click, the sound of a motion sensor triggering nearby. Claire stood, spinning toward the noise. A small screen on the side wall of the hangar blinked to life. A flicker of static, then a face. Grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. Her grandfather, younger, in uniform, and behind him standing just out of frame the same woman from the photo. C. Redmond. She looked straight into the camera. And then she said one word. Claire. Claire scrambled back from the monitor, her heart thudding so loud it echoed in her ears. The screen blinked off almost as quickly as it had appeared. The woman's voice. Her voice hanging in the air like fog. She stood frozen in the center of the hangar, the echoes of her name still bouncing off the steel walls. She wasn't ready to leave. But she needed air. Real air. Sunlight. Something that didn't smell like oil, secrets, and sealed history. She took the stairs 2 at a time, burst through the open hatch, and gulped in a breath like she'd been underwater. It was late afternoon now. The windmill creaked softly in the breeze. The cornfields rustled with dry, golden wind. The farmhouse sat in shadow. But there was something else. Movement. At the edge of the field, Claire froze. A figure was standing among the cornstalks, tall, still, watching. She blinked, heart hammering. "Hello?" she called. The man stepped forward, slowly, calmly. He wore a long, dark coat, work boots caked in dust, and a ball cap pulled low. His hands were bare, empty. He looked like any local rancher, except for one detail the badge clipped to his belt. It didn't say sheriff, or USDA, or anything local. It said Depth of Strategic Aeronautics, clearance blue. He stopped, just short of the windmill, and nodded at her casual, like they'd met before. "You opened it," he said. Claire didn't answer. "You shouldn't have done that." Still, she said nothing. The wind picked up between them. The grass hissed. "I knew Harold," the man added. "We worked together, a long time ago. I used to come by the farm sometimes, usually left before you were up." That part chilled her. She remembered being 10, 11, waking up some mornings to find coffee mugs rinsed in the sink that weren't theirs. Her grandfather always said it was just neighbors dropping off tools. "Who are you?" she asked, voice low. "Someone trying to protect what's left," he replied. "And what you just stepped into it was never supposed to be passed down." Harold made a choice, a selfish one. He let legacy get in the way of safety. He stepped closer, not threatening, but firm. "You need to lock that hatch back up. Burn the journal. Leave it be. No one else needs to know." Claire squared her shoulders. "Why?" "Because that project was buried for a reason. It didn't just disappear, it was shut down. Contained. You're not ready for what's inside that hangar. And once others find out you've activated it, they'll come. They always come. He reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a folded envelope. Held it out. Claire didn't take it. What is it? A choice, he said. Walk away. We'll seal the site. Keep you out of it. No questions asked. Or what? He met her eyes. Or you'll end up like the last person who tried to finish what your grandfather started. And with that, he turned and walked back into the corn, disappearing as silently as he came. Claire didn't sleep that night. Not even close. She sat at the kitchen table, the envelope from the man in the cornfield unopened in front of her. The farmhouse creaked and groaned in the wind like it always had. But now those noises didn't feel comforting. They felt like signals, warnings, wrapped in wood and dust. She thought of calling someone. But who? The police? Her college roommate who once told her conspiracy theories were just evidence with attitude? Nobody would understand. Not really. Not unless they had grown up around these fields, driven these roads, eaten from the same pie tins passed around at potlucks. And so, with the sun rising low behind the barn, Claire made a decision. She got in the truck and drove into town. Maple Ridge hadn't changed much. The diner still had the same cracked vinyl booths. The hardware store still smelled like fertilizer and old pennies. She parked in front of the general store, walked in, and scanned the familiar faces. A few heads turned. Some nodded politely, others looked away too quickly. She found who she was looking for behind the counter. Agnes Geller, 73, owned the store for 50 of them. She had a memory sharper than any tool in stock. Claire walked up and placed the folded envelope on the counter. Did you know my grandfather was military? Agnes didn't blink. She just tilted her head slightly, like someone listening for thunder in the distance. Everyone here knew Harold had secrets. But we respected the man enough to let him keep them. Claire narrowed her eyes. You all knew? Agnes sighed. And for the first time in all the years Claire had known her, she looked tired. Not old, but burdened. Back in '68, a convoy came through town. Quiet. No insignia, no press, 5 black trucks, and a man who called himself Director Cole. They met Harold out by the silo. Some of us watched from a distance. Some didn't need to. But after that night, the hangar was never spoken of again, and Harold, he stopped flying, started farming full-time. Claire leaned forward. Was there a woman with them? Redmond? Agnes blinked slowly. That name seemed to strike something deeper. She didn't answer at first. She came later, she whispered. Stayed a few months. Helped Harold with something in the barn. Then one night, she was gone. He never spoke of her again. Just stopped laughing the way he used to. Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. Who was she? Agnes looked at her, really looked. I think she was someone he loved once, and someone the government wanted erased. There was a long silence between them. Then Agnes placed a small folded slip of paper beside the envelope Claire had brought. She left this for you, she said softly. Told me to give it to you if you ever came asking. Claire opened it slowly. One line. In clean, looping script, you weren't erased. You were hidden on purpose. And underneath, a series of coordinates. Claire's hands shook. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Claire sat in the truck outside the general store for nearly an hour, the slip of paper spread across the steering wheel. She must have read that single sentence 20 times. You weren't erased. You were hidden on purpose. The words didn't just rattle her. They rearranged something inside her, like bones shifting into place after being out of joint for years. The coordinates pointed to a spot just west of the property line, a stretch of overgrown pasture that hadn't been mowed in over a decade. She'd walked through it before back when she was 12, chasing grasshoppers and pretending to be an explorer. Back when the world was smaller and simpler. But now it held weight. Now, it was part of a map. She followed the numbers in the afternoon light, boots crunching against brittle weeds, the sky flat and silver above. About 200 yards from the fence, she saw it, a flat slab of concrete, half covered in moss and leaves. It looked like an old foundation, maybe for a shed that had rotted away. But the moment she stepped onto it, something clicked beneath her feet. A pressure sensor, or maybe a proximity trigger. And then, beneath the rustle of the wind, a soft mechanical whir began. A small panel rose from the center of the concrete. Dust hissed away. A voice, soft, female, unmistakable, began to play through a speaker so old it crackled. "Claire," it said, "if you're hearing this, your grandfather and I are both gone." Claire's chest tightened. It was her, the woman from the photo. C. Redmond. "My name was Carolyn Redmond. I was part of Project Trident. So was Harold. But we weren't just engineers or test pilots. We were custodians of something bigger than ourselves. Something that didn't belong to just one war or one country." Claire knelt beside the speaker. Her hands hovered like she could somehow touch the past. "You were born under surveillance. They told us you wouldn't survive the transfer, that your brain wouldn't adapt to the protocols we'd installed. But you did. You adapted. You forgot. And that was the plan. A clean slate. No memory of the project. No knowledge of what they did to make you compatible." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "You were the final test. The one thing they couldn't predict. That's why Harold left. That's why we disappeared. To protect you. To bury you in peace until the world was ready to reckon with what it built." There was a pause. "I never got to hold you," the voice continued, "but I watched from a distance. Every year, every birthday, until they told me I was done." The voice began to tremble. "I loved your father. And I loved Harold. But most of all, I loved the idea that someday you'd know the truth and choose what to do with it. The hangar is active now, which means the fail-safes are too." A new tone in her voice. Not fear. Warning. "You're not the only one listening anymore." The speaker clicked off. Silence followed. But it was the kind that buzzed like something had just awakened. Claire stood. Whatever had been hidden had now been found. Claire stood on that weathered concrete slab as the wind curled around her like a whisper from the past. She looked out over the field, toward the farmhouse in the distance, that simple, sagging house, where she'd once shelled peas on the porch and watched the sunset with a man she thought she understood. But now, every part of that memory felt layered, coated. A quiet love folded over layers of sacrifice and silence. She walked back to the hangar slowly, boots dragging through the tall grass. The sun was dipping low now, casting long shadows across the corn rows. A coyote barked in the distance. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't returning home, she was returning to duty. The hatch waited for her, still open, still humming. She descended the stairs without hesitation this time, the journal tucked under her arm, the note from Redmond pressed flat against her chest like armor. Down the long hall, past the ribs and vaults, toward the aircraft. The Trident 7 sat where she'd left it. But now it felt different. Not like a relic. Not like a mystery. Like a question she finally understood enough to try answering. Claire stepped up to the cockpit again, ran her hand across the canopy. The glass hissed slightly, then unlocked with a slow click. Inside, the controls blinked to life on their own, as if recognizing her presence or her bloodline. She climbed in. It felt natural in a way that frightened her. No labels, no instructions. Just muscle memory she didn't remember earning. Her hands moved to the ignition slot. She reached for the pendant, then paused. The final words of the journal came back to her. "The key isn't the pendant. It's you." She looked to her left. A small recessed scanner blinked blue. She placed her palm against it. A moment of silence. Then, ident confirmed. Claire Jensen, Trident Protocol, unlocked. The hangar lights surged. Above her, the catwalk doors hissed open, one by one. Somewhere behind her, hydraulic systems spun to life. The aircraft gently shuddered under her, as internal power rippled through its core. Claire stared straight ahead. Beyond the canopy, a tunnel opened in the far wall, a launch track, a delivery system, and then, Something on the main console flickered into focus, a line of text, white on black. Asterisk. Asterisk. Choose your course. Shutdown system. Initiate test sequence. Upload to network. Asterisk, asterisk. Claire reached toward the console, her fingers hovering between the options. Each choice had weight, finality. Shutdown meant burying everything again the way he had. Test meant discovery, risk. Upload meant exposure. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about an aircraft. It was about a life hidden in her bones, a legacy sealed in concrete, and a truth that no longer fit inside a hangar. Claire closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, her hand moved steady, sure, and pressed a button. The system responded with a soft chime. The countdown began. Somewhere far above, in a world that had long forgotten this place, satellites blinked awake. Data packets streamed. Old names lit up old databases. Claire didn't flinch. She was no longer the girl who'd inherited a farm. She was the woman who'd inherited a purpose. And now, it was in her hands.